8, 7, 6. Why don't we go ahead and start admitting? Thank you all for joining us today as we acknowledge those individuals who have served in our armed forces. This is Fielding's Honoring Our Veterans event. The event today is an opportunity to learn more about veteran experiences and how we might be better allies and partners in supporting our veteran communities, both here at Fielding and in our professional capacities. Before we begin, however, please allow me to provide our Fielding Land acknowledgement. As a global distributed learning institution, Fielding Graduate University avows the following. We commit ourselves to promoting educational opportunities in partnership with Indigenous peoples worldwide who are interested in advancing educational and professional opportunities in Fielding's area of expertise. We commit ourselves to consulting and cooperating in good faith with Indigenous peoples through their own representative institutions. We commit ourselves to promoting and protecting the rights of Indigenous peoples by actively promoting the scholarship of Indigenous communities through Fielding University Press to advance knowledge and provide venues for knowledge production and dissemination. We recognize and acknowledge that traditional knowledge cannot be separated from natural and cultural resources, and as such, all Indigenous knowledge should be protected and respected. By centering Indigenous communities, their knowledge, tradition, and worldviews, we are working in partnership in order to enhance the next generation of world Indigenous leadership committed to building a more just and sustainable world. Thank you for allowing me to share our land acknowledgement. And at this time, in honor of our veterans, I would like to introduce Provost Wendy Williams to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. I thought I would start with the welcome with sharing my own personal experience. Many of you all don't know this because we're still getting to know each other within our community, but I am the daughter, granddaughter, niece of men who have served in our United States Armed Forces. My grandfather, Herman Odom Sr., my uncle, Herman Odom Jr., and my other uncle, Earl Brantley, served in Vietnam and the Korean Wars. And when I think about their experiences and their service, what their service has meant to them, what it's meant to this country, and what it's meant to our family, I'm filled with a complex range of emotions and reactions, responses. On the first, there's pride. My grandfather, my uncle in particular, felt tremendous pride in being able to be identified as serving this country, serving the military, serving the agenda of our country across borders and in times of war, but also in times of peace. For them, it was an opportunity to be seen as men in a country that didn't see them that way all the time. And because that was also the case too, in terms of the ways that race and racism has shaped those experiences, they had the unfortunate experience of not always having the opportunity to access the services and care that were due to them when they returned home. And I think that that is what we're talking about today. We're talking about our relationship to those who sign up, who are chosen, who are selected, who are required to serve, and our accountabilities to them as a society and as a culture and as a community. As a distributed learning environment, Fielding sits in a particular and important space that creates educational accessibility at the graduate level to these service people. Service people. I am mindful of our gender norms in terms and the way that we talk about that. And at the same time, when they are attempting to reintegrate from what life is and what the roles are that they serve when they are in service, they're not always receiving the type of support that they need. And so I'm really, really grateful for this conversation, for the folks who are joining us today. We're going to get full introductions of each of them in just a moment, and to honor them and their service and their names. But also to hear from them what it is that we need to know to be better stewards of all the members of our community when they give their life, when they give their time, their energy, their talent toward protecting and serving and advancing the goal and vision of democracy through their service in our United States government, through service in our military. So I want to say today to each of you, I honor you and I thank you for your service. And I'm very deeply appreciative for the ways in which you've sacrificed and also what you are going to contribute to our community today to help us more fully understand not only what your duty has meant for our country, but what our duty is to you. So thank you so much. And I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Provost Williams, and thank you so much for sharing from your heart your own reflections and personal experience. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the lead of this important program. A Fielding doctoral student has served as the impetus for this honoring of our veterans here at Fielding Graduate University. Her name is Christina St. Clair. She is a third-year clinical psychology student with a concentration in neuropsychology. She served for 10 years as a military intelligence officer in the U.S. Army Reserves, with deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and West Africa. So thank you all again for joining us as we move into this program. Christina St. Clair will kindly introduce our amazing panelists for today. Christina?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Davis White Eyes. That was such a great introduction, and I'm happy to be here. I'm glad this is the second year that we've been able to do this. And thank you, Dr. Williams, for your amazing opening remarks. I appreciate you being here as well. So it is also my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists, and in no particular order. First, we have Dr. John Ruffin, who is there is an order. Let me go in the order of the slides. So, okay, we have Dr. Miguel Guilarte. He has a diverse background that includes degrees in sociology, theology, philosophy, and engineering. He has been a faculty member at Fielding for over 25 years. He has also been a professor at the University of Michigan and California State University, San Marcos. His intellectual interests focus on adult development, especially around areas of transition and transformation. In addition, he also works in the field of trauma, especially when this can be a catalyst for personal growth in connection with post-traumatic growth theories, which entails exploration of cognitive schemas, existential exploitation, and spiritual growth. He has also focused his work in support of veterans and veterans' transition from the military into civilian life. Okay, we can go to the next one, please. Thank you. And now we have Dr. Barton Buchner, is the interim director and a founding faculty member of the Military Psychology Master's Program at Adler University, and served as a board member of the Coordinated Management of Meaning Institute for Personal and Social Evolution since 2014. He is a 1978 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and earned a master's in organization development and assessment from Case Western Reserve University in 1993 and a doctorate from Fielding in 2014. Dr. Buchner spent 30 years in the Navy in both operational and staff assignments, retiring at the rank of captain in 2008. He also served for many years with the California Department of Veterans Affairs, where he had the opportunity to listen to stories from veterans from World War I to Korea, Vietnam to Desert Storm, and the current campaigns associated with the global war on terrorism. From this experience, he gained a keen awareness of the power of these stories, often touching on difficult experience that challenged deeply held beliefs and sense of identity. His work focused on ways to better understand the potential for personal growth and social evolution by applying the coordinated management of meaning and cosmopolitan communication principles to veterans who have experienced moral injury. Next, please. And now we have Dr. John Ruffin, who is a graduate of the doctoral program in Human and Organization Development at Fielding. He is also the co-founder of the Climate Dialogue Group and has been an organization development consultant for more than 40 years, advising senior executives and their teams from a range of federal government agencies to Fortune 100 companies. He's been advising in strategic planning, culture dynamics and change, and performance systems development. Dr. Ruffin has written extensively on the challenge of organizational founders working in collaboration with their boards of directors and the phenomenon of founders syndrome. And next, last but certainly not least, we have Major Jeremy Jinkerson, who is the Neuropsychology Element Chief with the 60th Operational Medical Readiness Squadron at Travis Air Force Base in California. Major Jinkerson conducts neuropsychological evaluations for a diverse population of joint service members, retirees, and family members. Major Jinkerson also completed his doctorate at Fielding, completed an internship at the Gulf Coast Veterans Healthcare System, and a fellowship in clinical neuropsychology at Burke Army Medical Center. Prior to his fellowship, Major Jinkerson served as the Director of Psychological Health at Kessler Air Force Base, where he led on-base prevention efforts, formed the working group that developed Kessler's Leadership Enhancement and Development Seminar, and also served as the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention and Treatment Program Manager. Dr. Jinkerson is board certified in cognitive and behavior psychology and is known for his research in moral injury. And I would like to thank all of you for your service and for being a part of this year's Honoring Our Veterans event.
Thank you, Christina. And thank you, everyone, for again joining us today. And a special thank you to each of our panelists. So why don't we begin? And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Ruffin. You have served for many years as the board chair of the National Veterans Foundation. Throughout your years of service, what are some of the main themes that regularly came up as it relates to veteran affairs? Do you feel those themes have changed over time? And if so, why? You're on mute, Dr. Ruffin.
Okay, how am I now?
Fine, thank you.
I heard, okay. First of all, let me just introduce myself as well. I'm a U.S. Army vet officer in the Army Intelligence, by the way, Christina, and a vet of the Vietnam War. And just between us intelligence officers, I was 9666 MOS, which is counterintelligence. I was in a non-combat role. Nonetheless, I've been a witness over the years of what's been happening within our vet population. So yes, I've been the chairman of the board of the National Veterans Foundation. I need to tell you that there are about 100 formally recognized veteran service organizations nationally, and yet there are there are nearly 40,000 other independent local organizations that are serving veterans, many in their local communities. The NVF, which is located in Los Angeles, is actually one of the smaller national groups, but quite effective. I might also mention that Dr. Buechner has been a board member of this organization as well. So of the trends and the issues, foremost of concern is the mental health and for suicide ideation and suicide of vets of all eras and theaters. And for the past 10 years, the veteran suicide rate has been almost 22 vets per day, and sometimes greater. And you just think of that. That's more than combat deaths. Since the end of the Vietnam War, approximately 150,000 veterans have taken their own lives. Obviously more than all the deaths in Vietnam and since that time. It's estimated that 30,000 veterans, more than 30,000 veterans of post 9/11 conflicts have died by suicide. So since 9/11, this is compared to 4 times as many veterans died by suicide personnel than were killed during the post 9/11 conflicts. The National Veterans Foundation has been addressing that. The founder of the NVF, Shad Meshad, is a licensed psychologist dealing with PTSD since, just lost my notes, since the Vietnam War, amidst the Vietnam War, and really helped get that disability designated in DSM-IV in the 1980s so that it could be treated as an actual disability and get benefits. Members of that staff who are also dealt with their own PTSD are the ones who are the counselors and skilled in trauma-informed training. And so they can respond with knowledge. By the way, 53% of all vet suicides are with Army veterans, as compared to the rest of the services. Additionally, another trend is that so many vets are confused when they get out of the military, confused by the VA system, which is elaborate and complex and confusing. Many don't know how to get benefits, find copies of their records, apply for disability, for housing, job search, any number of questions that come up once you're out, particularly if you've been out for some time and you haven't actually accessed that. There's an improved reentry program from DoD now, but for so many have served for years, many have been forgotten. An 800 number, and the NVF has an 800 number, gives them an answer from a single point of human contact. Counselors, also a veteran, understands their condition and is a kind of a human directory, if you will, to find help, often with another veteran service officer or a vet center. Thirdly, the trend that we've been seeing is the tragedy of vet homelessness. And this is all over the country for a wide variety of reasons, but 31% of all homeless vets in the US are in California, one state, more than 11,000. Nearly 4,000 of them are located in Los Angeles alone. The NVF has a separate program of outreach that's focused squarely on the needs of these homeless vets, from getting them food, water, living supplies, those that are determined to stay on the street. Oops, I am going over here a little bit, but hang with me. It's a huge undertaking. And the other changing trend, and I would say is one of the most concerning, is the number of women vets that have been falling through the cracks of VA service due to sexual abuse, military sexual trauma, in addition to traumatic brain injury from the Gulf War. It's the fastest growing segment of veteran suicide is within the female ranks. It's tragically underreported, underrepresented effectively by authorities who could act or won't act on it. Higher rate of increase in suicide by female veterans than even their male counterparts. So the trend, this is an upcoming trend, and I think the other trend I would mention, Allison, is that of families who are the unwitting victims of all human tragedies of war, and particularly when one of the family members has PTSD. PTSD can often be transmitted condition to other family members who are trying to cope. And this is the area that I think is not getting the amount of attention. There's so much more. Is the VA response getting better? Yes, but this still so much more to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ruffin, for touching on those thematic areas and for raising up some areas that I think, as you cogently pointed out, aren't getting enough research attention. So this is really an area for more growth. And I think it aligns nicely with the work of Dr. Miguel Galarte around trauma. We heard a lot about mental health and trauma. So Dr. Galarte, you do a good deal of research on issues related to military experience and trauma. Perhaps it might be good to hear from you, your take on some of these themes. How do they relate to your understanding of the military experience and trauma?
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be with this distinguished panel of people that I've worked with over the years. Dr. Jenkinson, Dr. Ruffins, Bart Biegner, and others. It's just a pleasure and honor to be here. So thank you for inviting me. I wanted just to start with just reflecting on the news that I heard this weekend, where 4 current and former LA sheriff employees died by suicide in less than 24 hours in one city. And I think that while these are people in the sheriff's department, I want to recognize how many of these individuals that serve in our society in warrior roles, which is what our focus is on the veterans from the military. But we have people who are warriors, warrior roles in our societies, who are here to protect us, who are civilians in our lives, in our communities, so I want to express my gratitude, my honor for those who have served, those who have been wounded, and those who have lost their lives for various reasons and their families. So I honor them, and my heart goes out to this and my grief as well. One of the things that has always interested me, connected with your question, Allison, in post-traumatic growth is in the military specifically, is the way in which the military experience amplifies so many aspects of our lives in very profound ways. And I want to highlight briefly the positive side, which sometimes we forget, because the military often provides excellent development of leadership, and in ways that are extraordinary, extraordinary courage that we often don't take into account, especially when we deal with veterans who have served and how they have developed themselves, the kind of character structures that often happens in the military that we could learn from and with in the civilian worlds. But of course, we also are concerned with the costs of those services, the wounds of war, the wounded warriors that we experience in so many ways. And I want to just highlight two very brief points around post-traumatic growth, which is a big area. One is the area of resilience. And how is it, of course, that usually the military personnel are trained, through boot camp to become resilient for very important reasons, because of the cost of not being resilient, not having that sense of ego strength that is needed to be able to survive the kinds of challenges that they may face. But sometimes that resilience itself lasts too long, and they're not able to bring that back at a later point after they retire or after they leave the military. And how is it that we can deal with that issue of resilience, which leads to my second point that I want to just highlight, is how very often we find the experience of silence. And this is what I wanted to highlight, how silence itself becomes a way of not sharing things, because very often even this cultivation of resilience is a way of creating a hardiness from hard in our character structures that prevent us from actually finding our own vulnerabilities. And so how to think about the complexities of these dualities of a paradox between the notion of resilience and the notion of vulnerability. But it is often in that reflection space that about being able to integrate our wounds and our hurts and our traumas, that where the healing comes and where possibly growth can come in? And how is it that silence often comes in for a variety of reasons? And I'm actually beginning to work on a project or on a book on the issue of silence, because silence is often driven by a variety of factors, including shame. One is ashamed, one is experiencing guilt, and then a couple of our colleagues are going to be talking about, moral injury. But how is it that my focus is around the issue of silence, how it becomes very difficult to uh, um, find the voice. And this is where I want to end briefly, is how is it that we have two ways in which we can think about this. One is how we, especially in the civilian world, those who want to help, can listen to the silence. What is behind the silence? Because often the silence hides a great deal of hurt and pain and shame and guilt and fears, and how we have to deal with that even in our cultures. That not just the military, this is a big issue. How do we listen to the silence behind others? And then how to also refrain courage. This is the side, how do we help our veterans, how to refrain courage, that sense of strength, resilience, to have a sense that to give the voice, give them the chance to give voice to their silence, so that because it takes courage to be vulnerable. Thank you so much, Allison, for your question.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Guilarte, for that wonderful response. And I'm hearing some themes come out of that, especially the one about silence and the way you connected that with moral injury. Very curious about exploring that a little more. And so we'd like to move to Dr. Jinkerson. When we think of military trauma, we often do not contextualize it in a way that helps people understand the root causes of the trauma, or perhaps some of the unique foundational aspects, if you will, of that trauma. Your research, though, with moral injury, I think, is very critical in helping us grasp the uniqueness and the depth of this type of trauma. Do you think you can share what exactly moral injury is and the ways it manifests?
Well, sure, Allison. And first of all, thank you, and thanks to Wendy, Christina for organizing this. Bart McGill, John, we've known and worked with each other for a couple decades. I'm just, well, maybe just one decade, but I'm so enthused to be here with all of you, to hear how your resumes have grown and the powerful work that you're doing with veterans. All right, so moral injury then. Yeah, I think that defining it is a bit challenging, and so it's a worthwhile question to keep asking. But there's enough coherent material around moral injury that I do think we can grasp some of what it is, especially if we emotionally load it properly. So this is the idea that when any person, not just a military member or a veteran, but any person does something which violates their deeply held, closely guarded moral beliefs, they can develop a host of psychological problems. And I do want to point out, I'm not talking about violating morals themselves. So it's not talking about an objective moral violation. It may be, it may not be. And we're not talking about war crimes either. But we are talking about the perception of a violation, and that is really what's key. On the other side of things, some of my work, and this began with my dissertation at Fielding, was to limit or delimit what symptoms, if you will, we associated with moral injury. And Miguel is right on the money to say shame and guilt, and also loss of meaning. I've identified these as core symptoms of moral injury. And by identified, I mean, I read all the anecdotes, I read all the articles, I read Shea and Litz, and this is what they're talking about. And then there's this host of other things that may develop if we go through the road of shame and guilt and loss of meaning, like depression and anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. And I really, some of my perspective is making sure we don't conflate one thing with the other. PTSD comes from going through psychological trauma and perception of real or imagined danger. Moral injury comes from perception that you did something, that you violated a moral statute. Now, fortunately, Bart's going to come behind me and better contextualize things because he sees it all kind of emerging in the social fabric, but I'm a Fielding clinical psychology PhD product. And so I think a bit about the cognitive behavioral psychology of it. And so here's kind of how this thing shakes out. Something happens and it is different than what you thought you would do, or different than who you thought you were. And I'll give you just one example today, which is I knew an Army recruiter who told a mother that she could allow her sons to sign up to go to war and they wouldn't die. So I think you know where this may be going. And so after those young men didn't come back, after they paid the ultimate sacrifice, he had to deal with, I lied, but I thought I was a good person. How do we deal with this dissonance? And hence the internal conflict of the deeply held belief of I'm a good person and the deeply held moral belief of lying is wrong. And he violated his belief, which I think brings us back to Miguel, who says, where do we talk about the silence? Well, that dissonance itself festers. The guilt will lead to shame and the constellation of symptoms that I call moral injury. Or we talk about the silence and integrate parts in ourselves that we don't find very attractive, but that don't take away by themselves possible other fundamental truths about goodness or about living in harmony with others. I'll bring back, just to make sure I answer your question properly, about some of the foundational elements. Most recent research has actually been on core beliefs, and this is in a good Beck's cognitive therapy sort of definition here of beliefs about the self or the world and the future. Did a study with around 130 veterans from recent wars to see if we could separate people who went through these potentially morally injurious events and develop the shame and guilt based upon whether they had positive or negative views about the self, the world, and the future. And the bottom line is, it worked. And correlation doesn't equal causation, but building up our future veterans on the front end to have positive beliefs about themselves and the world and the future is going to be one of the ways that we're going to respond to moral injury. Look forward to speaking more about this.
Thank you, Dr. Jinkerson. I think you give us a lot to think about as we consider moral injury and ways that we can, as you say, work to mitigate against that early on as much as one can. But I want to follow up on this topic, and I'm going to move now to Dr. Bickner. Dr. Bickner, why don't you bring us full circle regarding what to do when confronted with military personnel who experience various levels of moral injury and trauma? You highlight in your research something called Transforming Trauma, Space for Growth and Meaning making after adversity. And in your research, you sort of help us move towards a better understanding regarding personal growth and transformation. From your perspective, what exactly does that look like? What can one do to facilitate that growth and transformation?
A lot is wrapped up in that. So I'll start by first acknowledging Fielding as being a place where these kind of ideas can be explored. And one of the things I learned when I got to Fielding, I didn't quite know what to expect when I got there, but I found that Fielding was very open to exploring the experiences of the contemporary veteran and how they might be different from what's gone on in the past. And several of Fielding's founders were served in the military, notoriously. And I also want to acknowledge Bill Cherry, the spouse of President Katrina Rogers, who was quite an exceptional individual, and she had some wonderful things to say about him, but also the way that she ran the organization when she was president. We were blessed to have a Fielding Veterans Connection group, which Miguel Galarte started. He actually organized that and founded it in partnership with some veterans who were there at the time, which some of whom are on the screen here today. So with that being said, we have an environment in higher education, and also looking at the full side of the glass. Every veteran coming back from military service has a paid for education, but they haven't been told how to use it for personal growth. So quite a few come out and say, well, I'm going to go to school and learn how to do a job that might pay well. And there's a lot more to an education, as we all know here, than just getting the credentials to be in a vocation or another. So this ticket to higher education, for one, would help returning veterans to acquire research skills, which would be a way of helping to capture some of these untold, unheard stories that the rest of us aren't hearing, because most of the people who've had those experiences don't have the space, the wherewithal to tell those stories in a very authentic way. And that's where moral injury comes in, is maybe it might be a bit much to say it's a defining issue of the Iraq-Afghanistan era, but it is an era. We're in an era now where we have given our individual service members a lot more personal responsibility for their conduct in the battle space. And when I mention that, I'm referring to rules of engagement that have to be followed, and the fact that everyone has a cell phone and can record and broadcast things. And I'm not going to get into the examples of where that can go horribly wrong, but it can. And so this notion of being kind of in a glass window puts some veterans in a position where they're not sure. They're not sure. That's just kind of a fundamental part of it. And not being sure can lead to self-doubt as well as paralysis. So one of the things we have found among returning veterans is very, very often the coming home part is experienced as kind of a not knowing quite what to do next. So when we start thinking about and I guess I should say a little bit in defense of the VA at this point. I worked for the California Department of Veterans Affairs, and we worked with the federal counterparts quite a lot. There's a lot of good people in a very bad system. And part of the very bad system is it was designed, maybe it wasn't so much designed, but grew like Topsy based on legislation being added to a core mission. And we don't have time to go into all of that today. But the point is, everybody expects the VA to do everything for every veteran, and they can't be everywhere. So one of the things that is fundamentally missing in today's environment, and I think it's getting better, is not the caring, because the caring's there in the general population. I think we have more caring about veterans than we've ever had in this country. But we don't have specific knowledge about how to listen, how to witness, how to be present with these stories, how to respond to them, and how to interact with them. And that leads me to look at this phenomenon of co-construction, that we build our future together, not holding on to what's happened to us in the past, or what maybe has been broken. And a moral injury is basically a breaking of a personal belief system. It could be the perceived breaking of a larger regulatory framework or meaning-making network or schema, rather. And so one of the things the VA is doing now, and again, they can't treat moral injury because we've classified everything that a veteran has coming out of combat as combat trauma. And psychologists are going to continue to argue about what treatment methods work for moral injury, what works for PTSD. But in the midst of all that argumentation, what's going on is that a lot of very good, caring people are looking and listening to the experiences of veterans. There's a very robust literature on post-traumatic growth, which is to say that experiences that profoundly damage our moral belief system also give us the ability to put it back together in a meaningful way if we have guidance and we have an audience and we can listen to each other. And so this idea of co-constructing that moving forward, I think, is a very powerful one that we're just beginning to understand how to live into. And the example I would offer for that is Shannon Kent. And I would say all of our students in the Adler Military Psychology program, everyone comes with questions, with things that they want to do, a great deal of passion. Some are veterans themselves, some are still service members, some grew up in military families but never served themselves. Some, like Miguel, have been around war and have seen things and know that we can do better and want to figure out how to do that. And so the one I want to highlight is Shannon Kent, who was a Navy chief, who was in the intel field, Christina. You might have heard of her. She was an Arab linguistic specialist. She deployed 5 times with special forces. The 5th time, unfortunately, she was sent into Syria, where she was having a meeting with some colleagues and was killed by a suicide bomber. So there was a lot that she did contribute during her lifetime, and some of her realizations about the transformative potential of opening up these, again, spaces of silence, these spaces where we can't talk, this area where we have become existentially isolated. And if you look at the Surgeon General of the United States, he doesn't see this just as a veterans problem, but it's a problem with our whole society. We don't connect with each other as well as maybe we once did. And so that may be one of those gifts that our veterans have for us, is 1, to recognize the importance of connecting, and 2, help us explore together some ways to do it across areas where our belief systems may be actually getting in the way. And that's where I'm going to leave it.
Thank you, Dr. Bickner. That was a great way to bring us full circle. We're at about 1:45. Somebody has, yeah, please, thank you. If you could mute yourselves, that would be great. With that, we have about 15 minutes. And before we go to, well, maybe what I should say is, if the audience has any questions, we'd love for you to put them in the chat. So this would be the perfect time for you to drop in anything you have for our panelists. And while you're thinking of a question, I'm just going to ask a couple of our panelists to give some of their thoughts, what are some of the key themes or thoughts you wish to leave our audience with regarding the experience of military personnel? For instance, what research and readings would you recommend to advance knowledge in this field? Dr. Bickner gave us some examples, but I'm curious if there are others that some of our colleagues here would like to share. And maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Galarte. Perhaps you'd like to give some thoughts and drop a few research articles into the chat.
Not specific research articles, but a research agenda. And I think I say this in connection with what I said before, because I find myself to be someone who is a student of the military experience, who provide a more amplified experience of our humanity. And how is it that we can learn from them in terms of, how do we learn about leadership? And what Bart said towards the end around our need to be able to listen to each other, the issue about a dialogue. So what I want to invite us is to learn more about dialogue, about being able to listen to what is behind the silence that we often experience with one another. And so I, rather than just focus in, and that is how we might actually be able to find ourselves growing together. Because one of the things that often is the case with the military experience is that we tend to medicalize it or put it in a focus of mental health. But what I want to suggest is that the military experience is actually a human experience from which we can all learn. So it is a universal experience that is just simply much more, we see more the extremes there. And how do we learn from them about what it means to be human, what it means to form teams, what it means to collaborate, what it means to grow, what it means to be strong, what it means to lose loved ones. And I think we have a lot to learn there. And it's not a specific literature, but it's more a research agenda. Allison, thank you for the question.
No, that's an excellent response. And framing it as a research agenda gives it a lot more power and actually allows all of us a lot more agency to explore and ask the kinds of questions that you are asking, especially as it pertains to dialogue and silence. I think that seems to be a theme that's running through this conversation. Dr. Bicknor has dropped some amazing research articles for all of you in the chat. So just want to call your attention to that. Dr. Ruffin, what would you recommend? What are your thoughts?
Well, I second a lot of the things that Dr. Bicknor has put forward. Thanks for those articles. The concept of listening and dealing with PTSD, and our therapists and counselors in with the NVF, for instance, one of the things that we've realized, and I think it's been realized broadly as well, is the whole concept of listening. Veterans don't want to talk about their experiences. They won't volunteer them. They won't probably tell you about them if you're just asking casually, tell me about your, because it's on a number of different scales. It's too traumatic for them to relive it. They think it'll be too traumatic for you to listen to, because you can't understand what they've gone through. You have no context, framework for understanding that. And so this is held inside. So many children of World War II vets will say, or even Vietnam vets will say, my father never talked about the war, never, until his deathbed. And that's, in a certain sense, protecting both the veteran and the listener. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it instantly, but there's a Harvard professor who has started a program called the Listening Project. Actually, there's a play that was written on, there's a book that was written on that. But the concept is listening without condition, unconditionally, and without comment. There's a tendency for those of us listening to veteran stories to say, oh my God, how horrible that was, or how heroic you were, or how, making some comment, either positive or negative, which is destructive to the storytelling. And what we've learned, I think, and Bart knows this more than the rest of us, is the ability to tell a story unconditionally without reaction is what is most useful in vets. I think the other thing, just in that score, is we have a tendency to the throwaway line, "Thank you for your service," and that can be kind of, it gets me off the hook for asking, what was your world, what was it like for you, in listening and going into that commitment. Thank you for your service, and then I'm done. Most vets react badly to that line, "Thank you for your service," even though it's well meant. But it basically means, I don't want to know anything more. And so it's worth non-vets thinking about, how do you respond to a vet in other ways than just the throwaway line, but in some more meaningful way. And if you have the time to actually listen. In any event, I'm not sure what the question was, but that's a lot of what is going on for me at this point. And oh, by the way, just in terms of research, here's another thing is, and Jeremy will know more about this than me probably, but the research into psychedelic support for moving through PTSD, where all kinds of other therapies have failed over years. And the MAPS group, MAPS, out of, I think it's out of Johns Hopkins, at least in Washington, D.C., is working with the drug MDMA. And there have been significant breakthroughs. It was legal at one point. It's illegal by Reagan, I think, but the FDA is now looking for ways to with clinical trials to find that really is a significant help.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Dr. Ruffin. That's great. And kind of bringing this home, we're going to move to Dr. Jinkerson for his suggestions also on research. But thank you again, Dr. Ruffin. I think we're building some momentum here.
I see it as well. And there's been so many threads put forth. I don't think I can properly respond to all of them, but we'll make an effort to braid them together, if you will. I think one thing that began to coalesce is I think it's important for us to recognize and affirm the relative health of veterans. That the default veteran is not a broken person, not a patient, but is not only a societal contributor, but is a societal leader. So I'm grateful to Miguel for pointing out, in fact, many of the positives of serving. The next piece would be, okay, but I'm interested in moral injury. So I've got a, kind of talking out of two sides of my mouth here, like let's affirm health, but I'm interested in what breaks health. Now, part of that is so we can stop brokenness from happening in the first place, but where this interest emerged from in me was this idea of like, wait a minute, all this moral philosophy can fit into psychology too? And so the definitive article is still Brett Litz and colleagues, 2009, Moral Injury and Moral Repair in Veterans. I put out the moral injury syndrome model in traumatology. It's called Defining Moral Injury, a Syndrome Approach. That was in 2016. There's a couple good review articles out there. Bart and I are in the Fielding monograph doing one of those. Let's see, recently, Brett Litz put out another one. It's also called Defining Moral Injury, but he's using a systematic approach. And the classic Dave Grossman on killing, because that's what that book was about before we had a name for it. A couple other things I want to hit, and I won't hold the mic anymore. It's been a minute since I've gotten to hear my colleagues talk about these things, and I hear how their thoughts have developed and grown. And so, Bart, I am intensely interested in this idea of schema-based meaning-making in communities. Because I've thought where you and I have had a beautiful disagreement before is like, is this thing psychology or is it communal? And of course the answer is both, but I think that's the answer to the answer, is that we are talking about the schemas that are held in our communities and how to modify those things so there's a place to hold moral injury, which I'll finish off this chat by agreeing with my other panelists. Thinking about should I address assisted therapies? Okay, so basically, EBTs, what has been called evidence-based therapies for PTSD, they work in 80% of the cases, and that's amazing. But what do you do about the other 20%? Okay, and it's an amazing frontier of research that is going to benefit a number of people who haven't been helped by the traditional stuff. But the beat I wanted to land on was this. Is that our departed colleague Sam Otterson was an absolute gift to veterans, and that what he did is what Miguel was talking about, is knew how to listen and could listen in a way of receipt without projection. If we're able to learn to do what he did and not do it in a therapy room, but do it in our natural communities, I think that's where we need to head.
Thank you, Dr. Jinkerson. That was a great way to sort of close out this wonderful panel discussion, and thank you, panelists. At this point in time, I'm going to turn the mic over to Christina St. Clair. I don't know if we have any questions, but I'm sure that Christina has some thoughts to share.
Yes, thank you. If anyone does have any questions, we've got about 5 more minutes to let me know. I think there was a lot of great conversations today, and thank you all for contributing, for attending, for participating in the chat. And, you know, I think I've taken a lot away from this conversation as both a veteran, as a civilian, and as a clinical psychology student at Fielding, and kind of getting my own thoughts wrapped around these topics that I've experienced personally, but then also where I want to go with my own research. So this is very helpful for me, and I'm sure others as well. I want to thank the panel again, and thank all of our attendees, and for the Fielding staff for really putting this together. Dr. Davis Whiteeyes and Dr. Williams, thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you everyone for participating today. We are just very blessed to have a community that comes together like this. And again, many, many thanks to all of those individuals who have been in service of this country and all around the world. So have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.